You cannot change the whole world, but if you can change one little corner at a time, you're making a difference. So we are marching, and
But you have got so much confidence.
they didn't tell you.
I didn't tell me, but I suppose it's
Life is tough, but you are tougher than tough life. Forgiveness is nothing more and nothing less but an act of self-healing. Maybe a guy steals your girlfriend, or a girlfriend steals your boyfriend, and you hate their guts. And every time you see them, you have the pain in the pit of your stomach. So the day you can go up to this former friend and tell him or her, you so and so, you can say that, and then with the idea that you actually forgive them, this is the day you are going to be feeling free from that burden.
It took Eva Kor 50 years to free herself from the anger she felt against those who tore apart her life. At age 10, she and her twin sister Miriam were taken from their mother's arms, leaving them without a family, transforming their lives in a matter of minutes.
But there are people who survived here, and those are the people who can teach us the very important lessons of overcoming unbelievable difficulties. This is the real message. People lived here and triumphed.
Here is Auschwitz, where in 1944 Eva was branded with the number A7063, a somber souvenir that serves as a daily reminder that she endured the Holocaust. But while some focus on the darkness of death, Eva sees the triumph of the human spirit.
Don't pity me, envy me. I survived and I functioned and I have overcome unbelievable evil.
It is an important theme to pass on, so much so that Eva lobbied the Indiana General Assembly and won passage of a law requiring Holocaust education in schools. To help educators develop or improve their curriculum, she journeyed to Auschwitz in 2007 with a group of classroom teachers, professors, and students, with hope that by teaching the lessons of the Holocaust, future generations will grow up free of hatred and bigotry. The story is not an easy one to listen to, walking down the train tracks toward a place that was meant to be the end, but was only the beginning of a long personal journey.
We were herded into cattle cars, 1792 cattle car. As the doors slid closed and then a lever came over it, between each two cattle cars there was a booth with a guard, and they told us anybody tried to escape, they would be shot.
After 4 long days with no food or water, the train reached the so-called Death Gate at the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration and extermination camp in German-occupied Poland.
The train is pulling in, the train stops, we are waiting and waiting, and then the cattle car doors are opened and a mass of people pour out. I was standing here on this platform, and maybe the train was here, and my mother, we never moved away from the train. There were lots of people and a lot of commotion here. My mother was holding on to us. In my childish curiosity, I looked around, trying to figure out what on earth is this place. When I realized that my father and my 2 older sisters have disappeared in the crowd. I never ever saw them again. That was 10 minutes from the time we stepped down on the cement platform. We were holding on to mother, and there was a lot of commotion. And an SS was running, yelling in German, twins, twins. We did not volunteer any information. He approached us and demanded to know if we were twins. Miriam and I were dressed alike, we looked very much alike, and my poor mother didn't know what to say. And she asked if that was good, and the SS nodded yes, and my mother said yes. At that moment, another SS came from this direction, grabbed my mother, pulling her to the right. We were taken to the left. We were crying. She was crying. I remember looking back and seeing my mother's arms stretched out in despair as she was pulled away. I never even got to say goodbye to her because this was the last time we saw her. All that took 30 minutes. Miriam and I no longer had a family. We were all alone. We had no idea what would happen to us. And we didn't understand why being born Jewish was a crime. There were a total of 13 sets of twins, little girls from age 1 to age 13 that were in our group, and we were just holding on to one another real tight. This is where we were processed. We were placed naked on bleachers. We were told to undress. Our clothes were taken away. And we sat naked for the better part of the day. We, the twins, were given short haircut, and Mrs. Chengery's head was shaved, and they told us that to have our own hair was a big privilege we were granted. Then our clothes were returned with a huge red cross painted on the back, which meant, and I found out only years later, that we were part of medical experiment. So as we walked throughout the camp, from far away people would know that this is a medical experiments group. Then they lined us up for registration and tattooing. When my turn came, I decided that I would not allow them to do whatever they wanted without fighting back. 4 people, 2 SS and 2 women prisoners, restrained me with all their strength while they heated a pen-like gadget. It looked like a writing pen with a metal tip, and then when it became red hot, they dipped it into ink, and then the dot by dot, they burned the capital letter A-7063. Well, many people look at my number, they think that it has faded. It was always like that, because I was never a very cooperating victim.
The girls would soon come to understand that they would have to fight to survive.
Miriam and I went to the latrine, and when we entered the place, there on the filthy floor were the scattered corpses of 3 children. Their bodies were naked and shriveled, and their eyes were wide open. And this is when I, the 10-year-old, realized that unless I did something, Miriam and I also would end up on that filthy latrine floor. So I made a silent pledge that I will do anything within my power to make sure that Miriam and I shall not end up on that filthy latrine floor.
That pledge was soon put to the test. The twins' lives had been spared only so Nazi doctors, led by the angel of death Joseph Mengele, could use them as human guinea pigs.
They would place us here on a bench in our clothes. They would tie both of my arms to restrict the blood flow. They would take at least 2 vials of blood from this arm. At the same time, they would give me a minimum of 5 injections into my right arm. Those were the deadly ones. They were germs and chemicals. The content of those injections we do not know up to date. After one of those injections, I became very ill with a very high fever. I was placed in a room with 2 other twins who told me, we don't receive here any food, nor water, nor medicine, that people are brought here to die. Next morning, Dr. Mengele came in with 4 other doctors. He looked at my fever chart, and Mengele declared, laughing sarcastically, he said, too bad, too schwer, too young. She's so young, she has only 2 weeks to live. This is my second silent pledge, that I was going to prove Dr. Mengele wrong, that I will survive and I will be reunited with Miriam. For the following 2 weeks, I was between life and death. I only have 2 memories. I remember the doctors coming in to check that eternally important fever chart. They never examined me, so they knew what they were looking for. I didn't. And I remember often waking up on the barrack floor. I was crawling because I no longer could walk, And I was crawling because I found out that there was a faucet with water at the other end of the barrack. And as I was crawling, I was fading in and out of consciousness. And I kept telling myself, I must survive. I must survive. After 2 weeks, my fever broke, and I immediately felt a lot stronger. And then it took them another 3 weeks before my fever chart showed normal. And what they really did, they would check my fever every day, and I manipulated the system a little bit. Yeah, I wasn't that kosher. When they put in the thermometer under my armpit, I took it out. When the nurse, the so-called nurse, left, if it was too high, I would shake it down and then put it back in and let it stick out on the other side. So this way I was in charge of how much fever the fever chart showed. Now, I wanted to get out of that place very fast, but I was also aware that they were so interested in that fever that it must have had some significance. It took me 3 weeks to get it down to normal. I was afraid if I would show normal immediately, they would not believe me. And I didn't want to lose that little advantage that I had over my destiny. Miriam and I never, ever talked about Auschwitz until 1985. The issue of Auschwitz never came up. So I assume that children who survive life and death experiences cannot talk about it until they feel strong enough, physically, safe physically, because the physical safety is the first step. The second, emotionally strong enough to cope with the memory. And when I asked her finally in 85, she said, well, for the first 2 weeks after you were taken away, I was kept in isolation 24 hours a day under SS surveillance at all times. They were waiting for something to happen. I don't know what that was. Of course, they didn't tell me. But after, and I don't know if it happened or it didn't, but after 2 weeks, I was taken back to the labs, injected with something that made me very sick. And I said to Miriam, I know what they were waiting for. It didn't happen. They were waiting for me to die. Would I have died? Miriam would have been rushed to Mengele's lab, killed with an injection to the heart, and the Mengele would have done the comparative autopsies. I didn't die. Miriam was injected with something that stopped the growth of her kidneys. Her kidneys never grew larger than the size of a 10-year-old child. When she grew up, got married, was expecting her first baby, she developed tremendous kidney problems. With the second pregnancy, they had to do a lot of studies, and they found out then that her kidneys were the size of a child of 10 years old. And this is when in 1987 her kidneys failed, and I donated my left kidney, and she lived another 6 years. After I got out of the hospital, and Miriam was so ill, I knew that I had to get her potatoes. Potatoes were the panacea for all kinds of diseases, and she needed to get her strength back in order to fight for her own life. So I volunteered the following morning to be a food carrier, and I wasn't picked. So the following day I yelled more, jumped up higher, and became more enthusiastic. You just had to be noticed, and somehow they would pick you. The rumor in the camp was that anyone caught stealing would be hanged. I hesitated, but I knew that if I did not get some potatoes, Miriam would die. So I bent down. I remember feeling a few potatoes in my hand when somebody grabbed me by my head, pulled me up, and yelled into my face, "It's not nice to steal." I was extremely surprised and almost burst into laughter. What I expected was to be dragged to the gallows and hanged. I have witnessed many hangings. That was not an unusual occurrence in Birkenau or in Auschwitz I. I just learned an important lesson, that as long as Dr. Mengele wanted us alive, no one dared harm us. So next day I came back, no longer worried that I would get caught. And I became the happy owner of 3 raw potatoes. Sometime around July, first we would get that gooey thing at noon, which we didn't eat, and it was impossible to eat, and an airplane would come. Now you can see the guard tower right there. This was a guard tower that I played peekaboo with the guard there. I could watch always what was going on. The airplane came. It was flying very low. The Nazis turned on their sirens and ran for their life. We were applauding. That was and I want you to realize, here I am, 10 years old, on the conditions that I lived. I thought that the whole world was one big concentration camp, that there were the bad guys, the Nazis, and the good guys, the Americans, flying overhead, because I could see the flags on some of the American airplanes. And that was my only sign, really, for me to realize that somebody was trying to free us. So it was a very important factor in my struggle to survive. Sometime in early January, we were told after the evening meal, everybody out of the barrack, we are taking you into Germany to protect you from the fighting. I had a very simple, childish mentality. I did not like those Nazis when they were winning the war. They were pretty mean. So I figured they would be even meaner when they were losing it. So we decided to stay in the barrack. And because they were in such a big hurry, they did not go from barrack to check people to see who stayed behind. Next day we woke up, we realized it was noon. We missed roll call. When we went outside, we discovered with delight that all the Nazis were gone. We were on our own. One day, I was at the kitchen, and I had 5 or 6 loaves of bread in my arm, and I heard the strange sound of a car, where no one had cars but the Nazis. So when I went outside, there was an army vehicle, like a jeep. 4 SS jumped out, took out their machine guns, and they began spraying bullets in every direction. The last thing I remember was the barrel of the machine gun pointed at my head, and then I faded away. When I woke up, I tried to feel my legs, and I could feel them. I could feel my arms, and I thought, well, that's the way it is in the other world. As I looked around, there were people lying all around me. I touched one of them, and she was ice cold. And this is when I realized that I must have had a guardian angel, because I fainted. I didn't plan to. I fainted long before the bullets hit me. One of the biggest problems that I had in Auschwitz I, food was very scarce, but water was the biggest problem. So one day I desperately needed water, and I went to the nearby river. And as I looked up across the river bank, there was a little girl about my age. And she was dressed in beautiful, clean clothes. She was carrying a school bag. And this was my first realization that there was a world where children looked like children and went to school. She looked at me too. And I was dressed in ragged clothes, swarming with lice. And the only school I was attending was the school of survival. A few days later, the guns were silent. It was middle of the day when one of the women went to the front of the barrack. It was snowing heavily that day. The visibility was very poor, and she was yelling at the top of her voice, "We are free, we are free." Well, we all ran to the front of the barrack. I couldn't see anything. I looked to the right, looked to the left, just snowing, until finally I could make out the faces of people clad in white camouflage clothes from the top to the bottom. They were smiling. And when we ran up to them, they gave us hugs, chocolate and cookies. And this was the first taste of freedom. And the first time since I arrived in Auschwitz that anybody treated us with humanity and kindness. So that was Liberation Day.
Eva and Miriam went to live with an aunt and uncle before moving to Israel in 1950. After serving 8 years in the Israeli army, Eva married Michael Kor, moved to the United States, and raised 2 children, Alex and Rena. In 1993, Miriam died, 6 years after Eva donated a kidney to her. Following her sister's death, Eva opened a museum and did something far more controversial. She signed a declaration of amnesty, forgiving Mengele and others who carried out the Holocaust. The process started, she says, shortly after Miriam's death, when a professor at Boston College asked her to speak before a group of doctors. She agreed.
And then he said to me the strangest things. He said, well, when you come to that conference, would you please bring with you a Nazi doctor? And I said, what? How on earth do you think I can find, or where do you think I can find a Nazi doctor? Last time I looked in the yellow pages, they weren't advertising there. And he said, well, think about it. Maybe you come up with some kind of an idea.
An idea did occur to her. She contacted Hans Munch, a Nazi doctor she had seen on a documentary about the Holocaust. While he declined to speak with her at Boston College, he did agree to meet her in his home.
Hello, Dr. Munch. I'm Eva Kor. I was very nervous. What I knew about the Nazi doctors was not making me feel very comfortable. But I was also very curious. What was it like to be a Nazi doctor in Auschwitz? I knew what was it like to be a victim. And because of that and a few other reasons, I arrived at his house with 2 camera crews and my friends, and he treated me with the utmost respect. And I found myself sitting down talking to him, and I said to him, strange thing, I said, here you are, a doctor from Auschwitz. Here I am, a survivor of Auschwitz. And I like you, and that is very strange to me. But why do we like people? If they treat us with respect and make us feel very special, we will like them. And we talked about many things, and I asked him if by any chance he knew anything about the gas chambers, because then, as now, the revisionists kept trying to revise history, and they said there were no gas chambers in Auschwitz. And he said, this is a nightmare that I live with every single day of my life, and went on describing the operation of the gas chambers. I never knew that the gas chambers operated that way. I thought that was very important information, and I asked him if he would be willing to go with me to Auschwitz in 1995, because I was planning a return to the 50th anniversary, and I wanted him to sign a document at the ruins of the gas chamber in the company of witnesses. And he immediately said he would love to. So I said, I didn't know it was going to be that easy.
Months later, Eva came up with a unique way to express her appreciation for Dr. Munch's candor, respect, and agreement to tell his story.
I went to the Hallmark shop and looked for hours and hours, could find no card that was appropriate for that kind of a gesture. And after about 10 months, one day, I thought to myself, what if I just gave him a simple letter of forgiveness? And I immediately realized that it was meaningful and he would like it. But what was even more important to me to realize that I had the power to forgive. No one could give me that power and no one could take it away. Victims of every type of situation always feel hurt, angry, hopeless, helpless, and powerless. And I discovered at that other end that I had tremendous powers. That really made me feel good inside, so I began writing my little letter to Dr. Munch. My English spelling is terrible, so I met with my former ISU speech professor, asked her to correct my spelling, and Dr. Susan Kaufman said, and she's a very matter-of-fact person, she said, so you are going to forgive Dr. Munch? I said, yes. But that's just a little letter from me to him. She said, well, okay. How about Dr. Mengele? I said, I haven't thought about that. She said, well, will you think about it? I said, okay. And again, the thought that here I was, that little victim, and nobody under his feet, practically just a guinea pig who he wouldn't give a minute thought for my life or the worth of my life yet. I had the power to forgive the God of Auschwitz. That really made me feel good inside. I said, I am not hurting anybody, so I might as well forgive Mengele. And the logical conclusion for me was that if I am forgiving the angel of death of Auschwitz, I might as well forgive everybody.
And she did, writing her own declaration of amnesty, forgiving all who had oppressed her. She read it at the ceremony for the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz.
Here in Auschwitz, the souls of millions of victims are with us. I read it looking up to the sky in Auschwitz, a very eerie place anyway. I felt that the millions of victims and my parents and my family were my witnesses. And I felt, and I signed it, and I immediately felt that a burden of pain was lifted from my shoulders, that I was no longer a victim of Auschwitz, that I was no longer a prisoner of my tragic past, that I was finally free. The day I forgave the Nazis, silently, I forgave my parents, whom I hated all my life. Because growing up as a teenager, I often would say, if my parents would have saved me from a destiny in Auschwitz, my life would be better. Growing up as an orphan was very difficult, and I blamed them for not staying alive and being smart enough to escape. But I finally understood that they did the best that they could. So I forgave my parents, and I also forgave myself for hating my parents. And I tell everybody, forgiveness is nothing more and nothing less but an act of self-feeling. I am lighting this candle in the memory of my parents.
Eva has forgiven but has not forgotten. She has spent a great deal of her life trying to find answers. She has returned to Auschwitz 11 times, with each trip a quest for information. She is a determined woman.
They're all fools.
On the 2007 trip, Eva got the unheard-of opportunity to hold in her hand a vial, one of 7 still intact, containing an unidentified substance believed to have been injected into her, Miriam, and hundreds of other twins.
The whole idea that I am sitting here and looking at actually the original vials that might have been used, it's unbelievable, it's extraordinary that you permitted me that privilege of seeing these vials and even picking them up and looking at them. So I am very grateful, and I think you have done a tremendous deed for me.
It's been a long journey to happiness for the child behind the barbed wire, but Eva has made her life meaningful. While her quest for answers continues, she not only educates others, but in telling her story, has the ability to change lives like no other.
Last lesson is, one of the most difficult things that we had when Miriam and I got back from the camp, we were just 11 years old. And we desperately needed our parents, and we needed hugs and kisses from our parents, and we got none. So when you go home this afternoon, I want you to go up to your parents, give them an extra hug and an extra kiss for all of us children who survived the camps and who had no one to hug and kiss. Thank you.